Hi, everyone. Welcome to Union Hall. My name is Esther. I'm the chief curator here. And we're really pleased to work with Zak for this particular Rough Gems exhibition with Laugh Lines. And before we jump into the curatorial event, I just want to share a little bit quickly about Union Hall and Rough Gems. Union Hall is a nonprofit art space, and we primarily support emerging curators and emerging artists. And we have been open since 2019, and we're turning 5 this year. So please come to our 5th anniversary party, May 31st. We changed the date. And also, just really briefly about Rough Gems, in case any of you all are interested in applying, every year we have a Rough Gems program that is primarily to support emerging curators. And we choose 3 curatorial proposals a year, and those curators go on to create a full-on exhibition in the space with financial support, staff support, and of course a space to work in, and a shipping budget too. So this is the culmination of our Rough Gems program, and Zak's exhibition is our 3rd exhibition of the season for 2024. So congratulations to Zak. He also had a really amazing Ray Rinaldi review in the Denver Post. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And also really quick, I'll thank our sponsors. This wouldn't be possible without Colorado Community Foundation, Bonfils Stanton, and Colorado Creative Industries. And so without further ado, I'll let Zak give us a sort of casual walking tour of the space, and we'll go, and Zak will share a little bit more about the exhibition in detail. Feel free to ask questions if you need to go to the bathroom. There's a bathroom code right there on the board, and you can it's down this hallway and to the right. And help yourself to drinks if you want anything. And yeah.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Zak Ashburn, and this is Laugh Lines. I really appreciate Union Hall for letting me do this, and yeah. So let me just get my notes out. Laugh Lines is in some parts serious and in others subversive. Ultimately, the exhibition seeks to become a space for critique through humor and very bright colors. The show also aims to subvert highbrow ideas of what art is and can be. The theme for this exhibition stems from the idea that we wear our joy and our pain on our bodies, and we in turn leave marks on the world and the people around us. Scars are visual manifestations of pain, while crow's feet or folds of skin juxtapose that and represent joy or age. There's also this idea that stems from the saying, draw a line in the sand. You know, you draw a line in the sand, you are physically making a boundary. You are stating your opinion. And that's kind of where the name for Laugh Lines comes from, this physicality and of emotion and living. In a sense, Laugh Lines acknowledges the issues in our life and allows the viewer to sit with that and adjust. We carry all of our experiences, good and bad, throughout the world, and you can kind of go 2 ways with this. You can kind of reject, or you can embrace what you've been dealt. One of the tools that I've always found to be very helpful in really embracing what I've been dealt is humor. Growing up as a queer, multiracial child in the South, there are many things that society and others pushed onto my mind and body. And the way that I kind of needed to turn against myself and my nature in order to survive in that state really like left a lot of trauma and issues ingrained even till this day. So it wasn't until much later that I started really analyzing those feelings and where they were coming from and why they were coming from with humor. It wasn't until that I realized that like humor kind of lets you make fun and like not be so focused on the bad or the more serious aspects of life. I didn't really know why humor had such a big play in my life until last year, working with the artist Anna Sualarkis at the MCA. Her musings about what humor could be really enlightened me as to why I've been so fixated on humor in my life. Humor can be so many things. It's multi-layered. It can be sad. It can be light. It can be joyful. It can be regretful. But overall, the main thing about humor is that it's true. When you're having these moments of laughter or humor, you're not lying to yourself. You're not lying to those around you and trying to cover up. So I think that the pieces in this show really exemplify this idea of what humor can do in our lives. Looking at this piece by Carolina Maki Kitagawa Frisbee, at first glance, you see this funny little guy, and once you dive below the surface, it becomes a lot more serious or dark. The inspiration of this piece stems from the story of a young girl. She was a white couple attempted to traffic her across the border of the US and Mexico instead of pursuing like legal adoption. So in this story, the little girl is largely unnamed to the media. In fact, once she is deported, there's really no record of her. So in this case, we lose all traces of her. While the white couple basically gets off with a slap on the wrist for committing a federal crime. This piece and this story kind of exemplifies how the US sees children born across the border, BIPOC children in general. What you can see here is that as a society, the majority of the people living in the US with this thought see children as dangerous or inhuman, and therefore they can be categorized and shuffled away without any sort of remembrance. You'll notice that this piece is made of two different mediums, the shark being low-fire clay, and the legs being paper mache. And this really references kind of that hard exterior that is projected onto children by the majority of the US. Whereas the softer legs kind of underpin the reality of the fact that these are in fact just children, and at the end of the day, they're probably one of the most vulnerable groups that we have in society. Now, moving on.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you explain why the legs are hidden inside of like another figure, like the pinata part?
So that actually comes from the artist's lived experience. This piece, in conjunction with the story, is created from a memory of the artist at a younger relative's birthday party. There was this idea of children being dangerous that Carolina was working with at the time. And thinking about this story, at this party, she looks over and sees her younger relative wearing the carcass of a piñata, like for fun, over his head, and running around and seeing this image, or this child running around with the top of a piñata on, really gave the artist that comedicness of like finding the comedy in like children being monsters, or finding the softness in that thought. Anyway, does anyone have any more questions about this piece? So at this point, I would like us to transition further in the gallery to speak on Eli West's work. So, just to introduce Eli West. Eli West is a wonderful multimedia artist working and living in Denver, Colorado. They're partnered with Pirate Gallery, and they have a very wonderful creative practice that I'm hoping they will share more with you about. Here you go, Eli.
Sure. Yeah, so these are 3 pieces that were included in the show. We've got this squiggly phone, this Among the Shrubbery large-scale piece, and then this other piece called Post Bliss. This series came about during quarantine when I just moved to a new city and was starting to really feel emboldened and included in the queer community there, and really get my own identity in that space. And then after about a year in that space of really starting to kind of like feel myself, all of a sudden lockdown comes, right? And I spent a lot of that time working on this series of trying to figure out how to re-engage and retouch with this vibrant, queer, largely like sexual-based community that I'd found myself in. So this series is kind of poking fun while also processing the pain of suddenly finding so much community and then suddenly being isolated from all of that community. So going from maybe cruising in the park or going to bars to meet hookups and fun people, and instead being at home, finding those people on your phone, or like this piece is a great example of that, of like being in bed after like scrolling on your phone trying to find hookups that you know you'll never meet up with because you can't, because you might die if you do. But like that like after moment of being like, oh God, why did I just spend so much time trying to hook up with all these people I'll never actually meet, or maybe I will someday. And then to represent all of the photos that you'd see in that area, we have little fingernails and thumbnails on this bush. So that's that representation. And then the other bush would be this phone down here. And then this piece is a bit of a self-portrait. I don't know if you can tell the body type is similar. But has me, or something representative of me, walking through this like kind of dreamy, absurd cruising park space. And then over here is a more live edge felted piece of representing just the phone and the access point. So all of these are done with needle and wet felting techniques. So these 2 pieces were needle felted onto already existing blankets that I had with me. And then this was wet felted as a base and then needle felted into. My series are kind of my whole entire way that I navigate the world is a little nihilistic. I like to poke fun at myself while also taking myself a little too seriously, but not seriously at all at the same time. It's that joyous dichotomy of our human experience. But yeah, is there any questions or anything? Did that speak to what you wanted? Yeah, what's up?
Yeah. What is the inspiration, or do you have like mood boards for your colors? Where do you get inspiration to do these turquoise and purples? And
So, well, this most of my materials are donated to me from scraps from another artist named Megan Shimmick, and she's this large-scale weaver based out of Oakland. And I'm dear friends with one of her studio assistants who was like, well, she has all of these like large pieces of roving that she cuts off and has no one to donate them to. So she started sending me like maybe every 3 months or so a box about the size of myself with all of these. So I'm kind of scavenging off of her color palette. There's a few colors that I don't really feel as drawn to that my partner can speak to being piled up on our patio. But these like shiny greens and these deep blues, I just really align with them. I don't have too much more of like a depth beyond just being like, it's pretty.
Yeah, I was really drawn to it because of that sort of 90s flair especially that old like Nokia looking phone.
Yeah.
The turquoise and the gray, all of it, it immediately attracted me.
Oh, good. Well, and also like in some of them, you can find these little like glittery moments, and that's from a mixture of bamboo fiber and then also some like, I think it's called like angel hair tinsel that gets combed into the roving.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned that like these two were felted into like blankets.
Mm-hmm.
And is that part like? Could you talk maybe a little bit about was that also part of some of the donation elements of it, or is there like? I mean, I kind of draw some humor from that element of it.
Well, so right as like during lockdown when spaces started opening up a little bit more, I'd go thrifting nonstop, and that's where I also picked up this mad awesome earring game that I have going on. But I'd be picking up religious blankets or like kind of conservative blankets that would have like, you know, like right to bear arms written on it or whatever, and then bring them home, and that would be what I'd make my art on top of, kind of as a little like screw you. So that was an element. And then typically what I'll do is like lay out the base of each of these blankets with just white roving. So I essentially get a canvas to draw off of. And so I'll needle felt that whole base and then kind of understand the nuance of the material, like where are the tears or the rips that I need to work through. And then once I have that white layer laid on, then I'll come back with the patterning. The fringe was kind of more of an experiment for how to frame these pieces though. So like I get really excited about is wet felting these like natural edges, but they are like bulbous and pop out in different ways that are kind of uncomfortable sometimes. So I was trying to find something that had more of an access point to viewers that weren't like really into wet felting, because sometimes, and I think they still kind of do cause a little bit of discomfort and confusion for people that aren't familiar with this technique, because it's hairy and fuzzy and unsettling. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's a question, maybe it's a comment, but the snake in that piece on the far end, it gives the last two pieces a sort of like Adam and Eve feel.
Uh-huh.
I wonder if that was your intention.
Yeah, so the snake is an element that pops up in a lot of my pieces before this series came into existence, and it continues, because this series was finished in 2021, but the snake represents kind of toxic masculinity and the more puritanical values that we're supposed to espouse, and it's this nasty, scary thing that pops up a lot of the time when you're least expecting it, and that snakes its way through. Although I don't really I do. Snakes freak me out, but I like, as representation, it's meant to represent toxic masculinity.
So there's like a kind of shame.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just feel it when I see that.
Well, and like the more I feel like the more comfortable I become talking about my artwork, the more I also realize all of the like kind of gross societal baggage I'm bringing into it. And that is representative of that. And then also in some ways too, like little squiggles, which in the broader part of the series, there's about like 10 other pieces for it. The like snake is juxtaposed against little earthworms, which would be like not being toxic. Should we move on? Cool.
So Moving on, we have the work of Yue Leo Wang. Leo and I met while in residency this summer, participating in the post-residency. And to tell you a little more about Leo's work in the show, this work primarily deals with the endless cycles of consummation that we feed into daily, or just in life in general. Whether it be feelings, fame, or hedonistic tendencies, Leo recognizes that the way that we as humans fall into these patterns of reaching for idealized standards, what is comfortable or what brings us the most pleasure. And the recognition of this is really what inspired these three works. Just knowing that we as people are constantly cycling back into old ruts and patterns. With this work, stuck in the cruising cocoon, we can see these cycles of hedonistic pleasure. We follow a soul sperm as it makes its way through the universe to the likeness of the artist's face or head, wrapped in plastic. The head is also orbited by otherworldly pleasures that kind of lean itself into this hedonistic vibe that the artist is going with. So the sperm makes its way to the head, only to recontinue this journey. And this kind of just speaks on how joy, the need for the next little bit of dopamine in your brain, how we're all endlessly reaching for that. And so with this work, I think there's a lot of conversation between this and the work that Leo has in this show, Scroll and Self-Adornment. With Scroll, what's really being talked about is this endless cycle of obsession with social media that everyone is constantly going through, constantly scrolling for endless entertainment. The work has so many layers. You can see that it's a roll of toilet paper with an Instagram feed on it, and in some ways this piece embodies the abject and plays with concepts of disgust and humor. This piece is very interesting. There have been a lot of questions about it. This piece is actually printed, the Instagram feed is actually printed on toilet paper. So this is very cheap quality, low grade product that you might find in, you know, like a rest stop bathroom or a gas station. This cheapness kind of lends itself to the idea that social media, the things that we're constantly cycling towards, lack in value. And the idea that the feed presented on the toilet paper is kind of, in a sense, disgusting. Toilet paper, in its own way, is kind of gross. We use it to clean ourselves, all that. And here we have social media displayed as it were the excrement, if you will. And I really think that in conversation with the piece Self-Adornment, you really get a three-part conversation, with Self-Adornment being about the role of fame and kind of acclaim that social media can grant you. At one time, fame was something reserved for the select few that had earned it, but now fame is just a click away. You can take a video of a cute animal or something funny happening and instantly you're famous, and this somehow kind of depreciates the idea of fame. You'll notice that in the piece Self-Adornment, that the jewelry is made of plastic. It's not made of high-value metal. And this cheap and expensive material kind of hints at the artist's idea of new age social media fame. Within these works, you can kind of really see the medium and how it makes commentary. And now, moving on, I would like to introduce Nicholas Nakai Garcia, who is a wonderful painter and illustrator. I am opening the floor to you.
Hi there. I've got two pieces, this one here, which is called Arrival, and then this one here is called Skeleton and Swords. You know, I had made this painting before Zak reached out to me, and this was one that I wanted to include because I wanted to make Arrival specifically for this show. I felt like this is my first group show in a minute, and I really wanted to culminate all of my ideas that I'd been working with to show as best as I possibly could what I'd been thinking about. Skeleton and Swords is a good example. I included it, by the way, for the inclusion of the motif, the sword motif, which is like the conquistador's sword that you see in Arrival, to show somebody who's perished or somebody who's collected all of those swords with all their gems and treasures. And this also is, the representation of the skeleton is a continuation of a long-standing tradition of the dance macabre, which is just a reminder of death, or that death, you know, prevails in the end no matter what we get up to in the dramas of our lives and history. But Skeleton and Swords is a good example of what I'm calling ancestral recall. It's an ability to unconsciously derive visions and memories and myths from our ancestors. And this piece is obviously much more provisional than Arrival. Arrival is a lot more refined. Because all these motifs and colors and arrangements come from ancestral recall, which is a completely unconscious process. But I wanted to move forward to try to build a storyline that would keep all of these things in line. And Arrival is a great, I think it's kind of like the apogee of that whole series, to be honest. I'll walk over there too. It's, the main goal of this, I think, was to try to talk about the history of America as the age of discovery in a way that is as colorful as the people who experienced it, because often when you learn about this era in school, it's the most dry, boring, cold rhetoric possible. I mean, no one wants to spend any time reading about it. You know, they say open your textbooks to 250, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe, you can't even remember where you left off. And I just thought, you know, if we approached the age of colonialism and the people who suffered it with something more fantastic, something really colorful, it would capture our attention like, say, Lord of the Rings does, or anything else that we end up flocking to Borders, which doesn't exist anymore, but to see the next copy of. And this also, the humor, because this was built for the show, I had to keep the humorous aspect in line. And that helped me inform like where I'm going to put my characters, the fact that there's this choreography of this fight is supposed to have in it a sense that this is going on forever. This is like, what are they called? Spy versus spy, endless rivalry. This is not the first or the last time that these people will be engaged in this kind of conflict. My conquistadors, not so much in this piece, but in others, are depicted as vampires who are constantly like hoarding treasures and sneaking around dungeons and temples and running through the jungle, trying to loot as much as possible. And then my Aztecs, and in some instances, the Mayans, are depicted with like honor and all of these gods that are able to, they're able to beseech, and you know, they're constantly suffering, the conquistadors are constantly suffering curses, which is also in line with the Dance Macabre. This sort of like, once you do get the relic or the treasure or whatever, you end up, they'll end up as like skeletons in their conquistador armor, you know, with snakes all around them, or brujas in the jungle, you know, have struck lightning on them. And yeah, this was like the perfect, very obvious, straightforward depiction of where this series has been going. And a lot of these ideas, although they come from ancestral recall, I wanted them to be as refined as possible, for the same motive as, say, wanting to depict my subjects with as much color as they felt in their own lives and that their myths had to them, which are, again, taught to us in the most boring way possible. But yeah, I realize I didn't talk about the materials at all, but it's just latex and oil base, and then everything that looks a little bit more detailed is most likely oil pastel. And yeah, does anybody have any questions?
For the jewelry that you have depicted and the gems, did you have any inspiration for those?
Yeah, a lot of my like aesthetic inspirations are just like 90s nostalgia. A lot of pixel art games, Tamagotchis, McDonald's toys when you were a kid. And, you know, I tried to represent them as much as possible in that light of, it's almost like the idea of treasure. You know, gems don't necessarily look like that, only if they're represented in an illustration or a video game or something like that. That's just what I like to see, and that's what I tried to depict as best as possible.
Is this an ongoing series that you're still working on?
Yeah. This Arrival and Skeleton with Swords is part of like, I don't know that I've named it yet. It's just this story of colonialism during the Age of Discovery, and doing a lot of research on the mythology and the history, and learning different Mayan gods and different Aztec gods' prophecies, seeing how the like European codices depicted them, and getting inspiration from how the European mind wanted to illustrate or how they like drew from life, which is exactly where that skeleton deity comes from. A codice. And but yeah, that's set in stone, and it also inspired my newest series, which is called Exotico, and it's just about depicting jungles and the African Sahara in a way where it both plays with the exoticism that I like myself feel when you think about lost cities and lost worlds and temples and, you know, magical flora that could cure cancer or something like that, and then juxtaposed with the fact that like that is somebody's backyard. You know, they don't see necessarily the same sort of unspeakable or ineffable exoticism that you do, although they have a lot of reverence and sanctity for that space. So yeah, that is much less figure driven right now. The newest series, Exotico, and this is like very heavily reliant on these two characters and a Mayan skeleton motif that I've been running with to depict these storylines that come up through me. Anybody else?
Yeah. So is your own heritage or like your own roots tied into like the inspiration for wanting to go down this path?
Yeah, I probably should have led with that, but this is. I think the aggressive and humorous nature of this is part of my own like internal dialogue, where I'm half Latin, Tejano, and the other part of me is fully from a heritage of colonialism. It's either England or Spain. So in me is both this conquistador who is, genuinely interested in aspects of exoticism, where you think of, what's the next highest unclimbed mountain is something that I frequently look up. But also having this huge respect for my roots, and also gain a lot of spiritual power from. For example, my girlfriend and I are building an ofrenda, which is part of Day of the Dead, where you set out marigolds and pictures of your deceased relatives. And, that's extremely important to us, as well as recognizing that, like, I have both, the conquered and the conquerors in me. And the only way to really, like, wrestle with the irony of that is to depict it in a humorous fashion like this. Anybody else? All right, thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll stand here. So next up, we have the work of Betsy Rudolph, or Dala B, if you know her like that. I just want to say first off that I just love how these pieces just vibrate off of these black walls. They're just like, it's like there's a light behind them. It's just crazy. So back to Betsy. Betsy's an amazing artist and curator who's been working in Denver for some time. If you have ever gone and seen the Casa Bonita show, she is actually in charge of curating that. So the works that Betsy has in the show are very congruent in the sense that they all tell a cohesive story. Each piece can kind of be seen as a beginning, middle, and end. With this piece, Forever, you kind of see the beginning. You see where our consumption of plastic kind of comes into play. As a Colorado native, Betsy has grown up her entire life surrounded by beautiful Colorado, and just that really secured this like love and reverence for the natural world. And it's with this love for the natural world that the artist realizes kind of like all the wrong that we are doing to it. One of the things being our use of plastic and non-degradable materials. Excuse me. So this piece begins where the issue starts, with our overconsumption of plastic. And then as we move on to stuffed salmon, ooh, my nose is really itchy. I gotta like, okay. Now that I'm not like dying anymore. Moving on to stuffed salmon, we really see where our use of plastic is eventually going to end up. The issue with plastics is that they continually break down within our environment, within our food chain, and within that, it causes greater issues for us. Increased exposure to microplastics and nanoplastics within the food system can lead to adverse effects within the human body, and oh God. I just need to grab a tissue. I promise I'm not. There's some right here. My allergies are so bad, y'all. Okay, now that I'm not dying from my allergies, back to Betsy's piece. So this piece really talks about like the way that we consume plastic on a different level than just everyday use. Once it makes its way back into the food system, it enters the food we eat and then enters our body, which causes a lot of major issues. And this is kind of really only touching the surface because not only are plastics such an issue, but the production of materials like this are such an issue. Moving on to all-you-can-eat seafood buffet. You get a clear picture of kind of where we're headed if we continue on with this continual use of non-degradable, non-renewable materials. In this scene, everything kind of comes to fruition. You see the vestiges of consumer culture drowned in the ocean because we couldn't fix our greenhouse gas pollution and our pollution in general, and the ice caps have melted. I really love how poppy and just like so playful these pieces are, with such a dark undertone. Does anyone have any questions?
Do you know which is her favorite? She doesn't eat there, or?
Like, which is her favorite restaurant or which is her favorite piece?
She didn't include it because she wants it to survive.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that with that question in mind, I think that her favorite place is probably some place that we've never even heard of and untouched by consumer culture.
Wow, I love it.
Yeah, so for the medium is actually Posca paint, and I'm just stunned by how well it like just pops. I've never seen it pop so brilliantly. So maybe Betsy's doing something a little extra, but whatever she's doing good.
Where does Dollar B come from?
Dollar B is like Betsy's alternate personality. If you've ever met Betsy, she's a character. She's full of not it, but life and joy and, the things that draw you in to people. And I think that Dollar B stems from a place of like freedom for Betsy.
Is it true she raps?
I can't attest to that, but I can not say that I can't see her doing that. I can totally see Betsy rapping. I'm getting a shake of a head.
No?
No.
She makes merchandise that makes it look like she raps.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Lastly, I would like to wrap up with the work of Gabriel Hutchings. Okay. Let me get my notes back out. So, inherently, these pieces kind of stem from a place in which Gabe is kind of challenging the concept of what authentic is. Here we see Western themes and motifs combined with traditional Filipino themes. We have a horse, bolo tie, aspects that kind of relate to this concept we have of Western culture and what that means within the United States, paired with these very traditional patterns and even like tools that would be used in Filipino households. The way that the aspect or the idea of the cowboy is married to these very kind of center-focused Filipino aspects is very, very much in line with the artist and kind of like how they see themselves. We have references to spirituality and material culture as well. I also really enjoy that there's a certain aspect to play into these two items. While, of course, we don't play with items in a museum or gallery space. These items are very close to everyday use. The bolo tie, bolo ling ling o, of course, is made to wear as part of like an outfit. The rocking horse, my Filipino is really bad, but kadkura ng niyog, we can see a coconut grater, which has been implanted into this horse's head. And the act of physically grating the coconut is kind of a labor of love. It's not easy to do. And combined with this aspect of the rocking horse, you get this wonderful idea of play where the artist is not only playing with the act of grating a coconut, but playing with the idea of kind of what identity means to them. Let's see, when you're on the horse, you kind of have to go through the motions of being on the horse and adjusting to what that is like. Kind of how, as a Filipino growing up in America and also growing up in the Philippines, kind of how the artist has to do throughout his own life. Growing up, like I mentioned before, Gabe was born in Texas, moved to the Philippines, and this idea of the cowboy really is cemented from that. Going to the Philippines and telling them that you were born in Texas, they have this idea of what that means, what the West is. And of course, you know, they tied Gabe in with being a cowboy. And there was a lot of pushback because, of course, if you've ever met Gabe, Gabe is not necessarily the cowboy type. But over the course of their life, they've kind of come to adopt that and say, like, this is kind of who I am. I'm claiming this as part of my identity because I did grow up in Texas and I am Filipino American while still being Filipino. So the way that the artist kind of combines these aspects of both Filipino and American culture really speaks on not only their identity, but also kind of like societal expectations of what it means to be Filipino or be American or be Filipino American. Yeah. And through these works, Gabe is really challenging the idea of what that is and what that is for them. Does anyone have any questions?
How did you meet Gabe?
So me and Gabe go way back. We have been friends since, like, I don't know, college. And I don't even know how long that's been now. I just say college in general. But we started out doing photography classes and, you know, we were always kind of like paired up and drawn to like being friends, but we like never really like put together that we were both Filipino. And so I think that like having that connection is what really drew us together because, you know, moving from states that have like your family in them and having this connection to your Filipino culture and your community, and coming to Denver where you're new and kind of spread out, it kind of like really helped us become really close. Yeah. Any more questions? Does anyone have any questions at all about any of the other pieces that I may have skipped over?
I'm just curious about your experience curating this show. How was your experience curating it?
It was so great. No, it was really good. I had a great time curating this. Being able to work in a space like this that is a little more put together than what I'm used to is really nice. It's a wonderful opportunity. And yeah, did I answer your question? Cool. Yes.
I feel like in the show you did a really wonderful job of presenting humor as that contradiction is usually almost a necessity for humor, and kind of in those presented in tons of different ways. So I don't know if there's any kind of thoughts you might have on that in terms of maybe your experience putting things together or other through lines like that. I think that was the most kind of enjoyable aspect to me, is like the very different presentation of that very similar idea, you know,
Yeah.
to some extent.
So, thank you. My brain kind of went away for a second. I'm gonna answer this, but tell me if I misheard you, because my brain is not working with me today. So,
I can rephrase it simpler too. Just the idea that, like, you know, humor comes from contradictions, and like, is there any other kind of like way that you find the through lines of the show beyond that in terms of humor?
So, besides humor, I would say that there is a very big physical aspect that I connect the pieces through. One of the reasons why everything is so poppy and so brightly colored is because I kind of like am drawn to that more, and I think that's because working in museum spaces, gallery spaces, you kind of get this idea that art has to be a certain thing, it has to look a certain way, it has to be minimal, it has to be maximist, all of these things. And a lot of those aspects of refinement that spaces are looking for kind of lack the poppiness and the kind of like things that are close to like regular everyday culture. And I kind of connect the pieces visually with that idea, as well as kind of just the overall themes as well. Does
Yeah.
that kind of clear
Yeah,
things up?
Totally. Like I think also as artists often do a lot of play within the studio, you know, I think it is kind of maybe another element of contradiction you presented, where it's like you do enter these spaces where we're expected to, you know, take things very seriously, and so yeah, just very refreshing.
Well, thank you.
I was gonna add too that as you were articulating each piece and the motives behind it, it became clear to me too that a lot of the humor we're deriving comes from some desire, you know, and either the lack of having it, the difficulty in getting it. All of these pieces seem to be some iteration of, you know, a desire, and it's like inability to finally like get to us, you know.
Yeah.
Just wanting to feel solid, I guess.
What do you mean by solid?
Well, like a lot of this, especially my work in Gabriel's, seems to be like, I can't settle on like what I am, you know, because they're very conflicting histories like that, you know, go into assembling who I am and my experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I expect the same as for them, but also this desire for fame, you know, like Leo's talking about, or this desire to not be polluted, but we can't do anything about it. It's just something that's going to be in us. And then also a desire for connection and romance, intimacy that is like completely halted, you know.
Mm-hmm.
This huge desire, and the only way we can really like settle ourselves is just by laughing it away, you know.
Exactly, and I think that is one of the great things about humor. It's like fun, yes, but it's also a tool, you know, where we can like allow ourselves to sit with what we've been dealt and kind of either move on or come to terms or whatever is next best for us.
Right.
Yeah.
To piggyback off of that, there is a very strong underlying theme of social commentary in every single piece. And I'm just kind of curious if that was by happenstance or if it was something that you intended.
So it was actually intended. Laugh Lines as a exhibition is kind of made as a space for conversation, for critique, and like kind of collective healing in a sense. So all of it was very intentional in that regard, because I don't know, there are a lot of things in my life that I know that I have critiques about, and change. And just with like the state of the world and everything, I feel like critique has been heavy on my mind. Yeah.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, one thing I wanted to ask you about was like how much like of a institutional transgression was it for you to put together this show in particular when you're talking about, you know, a lot of certain spaces, if familiar with the MCA or the museum or what have you, like a sort of blue chip aesthetic is expected. And do you feel like this is antagonistic towards any of those expectations?
I do feel like there are some currents of subversiveness in that. Not to say that I think that this is like lowbrow at all or highbrow. I just think that within this show, within my bringing all of this together, I think that recognizing these things like the blue chip standard that you were just talking about, I think that, oh gosh, my brain is gone. Sorry,
I was
everyone.
thinking that the humor itself, you know, is subversive enough.
I do think that humor itself is like part of the subversion for sure. I do feel like that sometimes when you come into a space, an institution, that there's something lost in translation between artist and institution. I sometimes feel that like the idea of art often overpowers the art itself, because you have all these expectations of seriousness and formality. And I think that being able to kind of play with medium and concept and kind of poke fun at this seriousness kind of lends itself to the show.
Yeah, in a weird way, it reminds me of, I think a lot about how many people die up in the mountains up here, especially tourists, and the level of like, the lack of severity a lot of people have. And I was thinking a lot about, you know, when you walk into a gallery, everything is severe, and it's supposed to make even the most silly piece seem like, oh, well, I need to be in awe of this thing. And then you go to the mountains and all the trail signage and, you know, pick up your shit, you know, and all of this stuff makes you seem like, oh, I'm invited right in.
Yeah.
And then at 14,000 feet, it's this completely different experience where you're like trying very hard to hold on to representations of humanity. You've got music in your headphones and an idea of you as a hiker, because the mountain is like this extremely inhospitable wasteland. You know what I mean? But everything around you, all the iconography is like leading you to think like, I'm completely welcome here. You know, this is something that I'm gonna post on Instagram.
Yeah.
It's like the flip side of what you get from a museum where you go and you're like, oh shit, I guess I'm in a cathedral of sorts, you know?
Yeah, I do tend to think that we think of museums as like the church for the art world. You know, they create the standards, they do all these things, and they affirm what you need to like adhere to. And I kind of don't necessarily.
Perfect comparison, museums to churches.
Yeah.
From art theft to theft of culture. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a perfect circle. So that was really good.
Well, thank you. Any more thoughts? Any more things? Do you want to take over?
Thank you. That was
course.
amazing. Yeah. Yeah, so Saturday is closing day for this exhibition, and then we are opening another exhibition called The Obstacle is the Path